We have a new update on the case out of Brownsville, Texas, in which a driver killed 8 and injured 10 people. He has been now charged with manslaughter. The driver allegedly drove his SVU into a crowd of migrants standing in front of a homeless shelter near the U.S.-Mexico border. Police are still determining whether the suspect drove into the crowd intentionally or not. According to the New York Times, police are looking into reports that the driver yelled anti-immigration insults at victims while attempting to flee the scene.
Right, so he drove through a red light, he flipped his vehicle, he attempted to flee the scene. His name, by the way, is George Alvarez. That's been reported. He has an extensive rap sheet, I think mostly involving violence against his own family members. Now, all the victims killed were all male Venezuelans, people who'd come, migrants from Venezuela, plowed right into them.
Yeah.
They were these people who were kind of outside the shelter.
At a bus stop.
It's
there's no
really,
bench, so some of them are sitting on the ground. So it's he ran a red light. That's important.
He ran a red light. So we're waiting for more information. The authorities have not determined whether this was intentional. I think they have not had a result yet of a tox screening or breathalyzer or something like that. This one may turn, obviously we don't know, so just speculating. This sounds like one that might turn out to be a drunk driving or something, or under some kind of influence to me, rather than a deliberate. I mean, it could be both. It could be that he deliberately ran into a bunch of people, but also was, on alcohol or drugs or something. But
yeah, I mean, so part of the delay has been apparently he's been very combative. They'd struggled with getting fingerprints from him because he wouldn't stop moving, basically. He apparently gave law enforcement a number of fake names before they were able to track down who he actually was. They did take him in immediately. He was restrained at the scene. He did try to flee, but they were able to take him in immediately. And I expect we will get toxicology reports at some date in the future. We just don't know yet. He was driving a Range Rover that flipped on the scene. This was really a cataclysmic sort of an accident, if it was in fact an accident. And so it's no surprise then that so many people were killed and 10 others were injured in this crash. And he does have a record of not only kind of the assault against a family member, but also of driving while intoxicated in the past. His criminal history also includes assault with a deadly weapon, assault against the elderly or disabled, assault causing bodily injury to a family member, assault of a public servant, burglary of a vehicle. It's a long list, which could militate in either direction, right? That could be evidence that this is someone who has been kind of socially aberrant, and this is just another in a long line of issues, or this could be something that's evidence of targeting migrant communities.
Why isn't it evident? It should already be behind bars, right? Sorry.
Well, I mean, it depends. Oftentimes in these cases, the fact of the person having a rap sheet and not being in jail is taken as evidence that they were never in jail or that the criminal justice system didn't work. But unless you think the penalty for every crime is life imprisonment or death, you are going to have people who are previously charged and convicted of things that are, of course, no longer in jail. And I think that a lot of kind of freedom-minded, libertarian thinkers are going to have to wrestle with themselves as they offer commentary on events like this.
Well, I don't have to wrestle very hard. For repeat offenders, the next time you go back for a good long time.
Right.
If you serve your time, get out and rehabilitate, great.
That could already be the case. I mean, this came up obviously in the strangulation and death of Neely in the subway in New York last week, where people said, well, look at this long list of encounters he's had with the police. He should have been in jail. Well, he did serve at least one 18-month term. I mean, these are long terms for, assault, basic assault, things like that are very in line with what people's expectations are in the criminal justice system. So unless you want to deal with the underlying behavior, mental health issues, the increased violence that we're seeing among kids in school and these kinds of things, you're going to have to deal with it. And I think that most Americans don't think that the most equitable and kind of freedom-based and sustainable and cost-effective way to do it is to go from being the number one population of incarcerated people in the world to being the number one population of incarcerated people by the world by orders of magnitude higher and higher and higher over the years?
Well, I don't know. I think people might want people who are, if we're talking about routine acts of violence against random people or family members or routine drunk driving or all these things, yeah, I think probably they should be incarcerated for longer stretches of time. I guess I don't know if my fellow Americans agree, but I bet they probably aren't so conflicted.
I have very strong feelings about drunk driving. I've been personally very affected by drunk drivers, and I still don't feel as though a life sentence is required for people who have engaged in drunk driving. Now,
like if you get out, get back in the car, drunk drive again.
Yeah, I mean,
life sentence second time around.
People's licenses should definitely be stripped away.
Right.
People have breathalyzers and other kinds of things in their car that prevent them from being able to drive at all, and those interventions make sense. But in this case, obviously now that he's been charged with manslaughter for killing 8 people, this is the kind of event that will get you thrown in jail for a very long time.
Life in prison now, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I don't know what the sentencing guidelines are, and I would defer to experts about that. But yeah, I would presume a very long sentence for killing 8 people. But the thing is, unless you want to live in a Minority Report situation where we're preemptively jailing people before they've done anything wrong.
Not before they've done anything wrong, but after they've done something wrong repeatedly.
Right, but you can't. You're going to throw someone in jail for life because they stole 3 cell phones, because they got in 3 bar fights, because what? Like, what is the line of smaller crimes that just because of the number of their crimes? You're talking about the kind of 3-strike legislation that led to us having these overfull jails at taxpayer expense in the first instance, right? So I do think there's a difference at a certain point. Again, unless we want to live in a Minority Report world where we say, well, because you're repeated petty criminal, you should have a sentence.
The Minority
that
Report world is then
bigger...
is trying to predict who's going to get crime and trying to engage in crime,
right,
and detaining them ahead of that. Yes, obviously that impugns civil liberties in a huge way, but people who've already committed crimes don't have the same rights as everyone else.
No, you should be charged with the crime that you committed, not locked up for the rest of your life because we don't want you to do petty larceny anymore or get in fist fights anymore.
Punch random people in the face or drive people over or all those things.
This is so interesting because as this discourse has percolated over the internet over the last week, a discourse which I've been very much trying to ignore and enjoy my holiday, it's become clear that there is a way that some more conservative-leaning people have framed this as liberals don't want people to pay for their crimes, which is interesting to me because it seems to me liberals want people to pay for the crime they have done, not the projected expectation of crimes that have not yet been
I have a different
perpetrated.
For me, it's not about, I don't care if people are paying for their crimes. I care about public safety. For me, the purpose of locking people up is to keep other people safe. It's not about whether it's justice or it's literally about keeping we jail people because they're a threat of violence to others.
Where do liberty interests come in? Where does your liberty interest as an American citizen come in?
I mean, you don't have the right to initiate violence against other people.
Okay, so where does that come in with like the gun debate, for instance? Obviously, we have been covering event after event of people who argue that one's rights under the Constitution to have access to a gun preempt other people's rights to be safe from gun violence.
It's right there on the paper.
So where do your liberty interests as a person to have due process and not be thrown in jail for crimes that you have not committed because you're anticipated to be a harm to the public?
What do you mean anticipated? You act like we're trying to look at a crystal ball and figure it out. It's if you've done violence against people already.
Of course, if you've done violence against people already, you're charged with the thing that you actually committed. But what people are saying is because you hit someone multiple times, you should have a sentence that's more commensurate with actually killing someone. The sentence for hitting someone is whatever it is. Go to jail for a few months, go to jail for a year. But people get back out because it's not that serious a crime that has, as a consequence, should have a lifelong imprisonment. Your liberty stripped for the rest of your life as a human being in the United States of America. That is very significant. We're all as society trying to weigh those interests. And
punching a random person on the face in the street should be treated as a much more serious crime than you brought up, like a bar fight or something.
Why?
Like, it matters whether it's a fair fight or not.
Wait a minute. I think that what you're articulating here is a feeling that many people have in this country in particular, I've noticed, which is that your interest should to never be the victim of violence at any time.
That is the goal.
Be safe at all times.
That's the goal for everybody.
outweighs the fundamental liberty interest of average people to live their lives and not be mass incarcerated. Because if you take what you're saying to the absolute extreme, Robby, you would say anyone who's ever had a parking, like a driving violation, should never have a car again. There should be no mulligans, right? Because some significant percentage of DUI folks reoffend. Significant percentages of people who've been caught with some small amount of marijuana on them or what have you, things that most Americans do, reoffend.
I don't think that's not an issue of enforcement. I don't think possessing marijuana should be illegal anyway.
Right,
I would just make it not illegal.
So we're making substantive claims about the kinds of actions that people think are permissible versus impermissible. And I understand that violence is scary. And no one wants. I also don't want to be punched in the face in the subway. Yeah. I also don't think that someone who punches me in the face in the subway should go to jail for the rest of their life when I have a bruise that's going to be gone in a week. I mean, like, I think that there's a way that you can say that something is important.
In the Jordan Neely case, the person punched had it wasn't just a bruise on the face. It was an old person.
That's horrible.
Twice sucker punched.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like if you get to have a country where people are running around mass killing people with AR-15s,
but you don't.
Like, just
if they do that, they go to prison forever.
And this person,
because the crime is the violence, not the possession of the gun.
And George Alvarez will go to prison for this, just like I'm sure he went to prison or was whatever the penalties are for all of the other actions that he's done. But that's not the question. People are looking retroactively to people's records and saying, well, they already should have gotten a sentence for killing 8 people for punching their grandmother or whatever that was. And unless you want a maximalist world where any single crime you do gets you a life sentence, that's
violent
insane.
Crime by, let's say you could reduce violent crime by 80% by having repeat offenders. The second time, sorry, you get a sentence 10 times longer than otherwise, and you could reduce crime by 80%?
And let's say that you can reduce gun violence by 80% by locking up every gun in America the way they did in Australia after they had a mass gun killing. They had a buyback program, and now there's no guns in Australia, and there's also no crimes. Would you agree with that?
Well, A, we can't do that because the Constitution doesn't let us.
Okay, well, this is we also can't lock up people because the Constitution prevents us because we have due process and liberty rights.
I think we could do it. I would tweak your proposal. People who have committed violent crime should not be able to carry guns in the future, as is already the law, and it should actually be enforced, and that's fine. Most people are not misusing the guns at all, so we don't need to take it away from them.
Right, but that's not a one-to-one ratio. That's not a one-to-one analogy because people like this guy aren't using guns. There's a million different ways to commit violence. So the analogy. Right,
you can drive somebody. You can take your car and drive. I mean, I don't want to put ideas in people's heads, but you can drive into crowds with. We're not going to get rid of all the cars in addition to all the guns.
Well, but that's kind of the maximalist argument that is ultimately being made, except because you personally are not being affected by the. Well, you perceive that you aren't going to be affected by the maximalist kind of incarceration regime that you're imagining here. You are satisfied with it. You think that it's about, you can control whether or not you act out, you commit a crime. So everyone should just be wise to that fact and know that if you punch somebody once, you're going to go to jail. But I don't know how many dystopian movies.
I didn't say if you're going to punch somebody once.
Well, how many times do you punch somebody before you get a life sentence in jail?
And not somebody, but people at violence against people who are again, you brought up a bar fight. Like a fight is a fight.
Okay, that's so how many times do you punch? How many times?
Fewer
do you
than
punch
40.
Someone?
We're talking about the subway. I know they weren't all violent crimes.
That's a mischaracterization of what he did. He did not punch people 40 times in a row, or at all.
I think we were going to talk about this case separately today, so we should save our power for that. But look, okay, maybe there's nothing we can do, but it seems to me in so many of the violent incidents we cover across, whether it's crime, whether it's some of the mass shootings, there is a history that could have been treated more seriously that could have prevented, potentially, the violence.
Yeah. Look, and conservatives are talking a lot about mental health issues. I think that the restraint that some people who have demonstrated an inability to show restraint, self-restraint, because of their mental health issues, should be in mental health facilities. That is the answer to the question. So for all of the hand-wringing about how this is a mental health crisis that is sometimes weaponized to take the focus off of, let's say, gun laws and things like that, I'm open to the idea that some part of this obviously is about mental health issues, obviously, a significant part. But the same people who are advocating for justice for Neely, for instance, are the same cohort who have been screaming and tearing their hair out saying we have insufficient social services support for people like Neely. And it feels, I don't know, hypocritical now for some people who are conservatives and who only wanted to defund those sorts of institutions and sorts of programs to now be saying, well, this is a mental health issue. He should have been in some kind of a mental health facility away from the public. I think that might be true. But we have to, as a community, decide then we're actually going to fund it and not just use that as a talking point when something like this happens.
Well, there was a plan to... I don't know who you're talking about. There was the New York plan. We should save this for the segment,
Sure.
Jordan Neely.
Sure.
We'll stay tuned. We'll be right back. More Rising after this.